Well, hello there, my friends, and welcome to a chilly Northeast Arkansas Sunday morning. Glad to have you. Thank you for being here. I know you're thinking to yourself, we have concluded Genesis and we're moving on. And we are. But I wanted to do something a little bit special as we conclude the book of Genesis, since it's such a lengthy book and so dominant with regards to the history of the human timeline. I thought we'd do a little bit of review, but primarily what I want to do is I want to show you where Genesis fits into the human timeline and share some details with regards to that. I think it'll be a rather interesting review, so I'm glad you're with me. All right, here we go. Here are 10 questions for you if you want to use those by way of helping your own personal Bible study and that kind of thing, so that you can get that going and use it so that you can internalize the Word of God, which is obviously the big objective here as we deal with this School of Biblical Studies. So there you go. You got a screenshot of that? All right, let's move on. All right. Some of you have seen me do this before, but if you were going to take and draw the human timeline, this is what I often teach. Give yourself a big long line here, and you can notice it's not exactly straight here, but you give yourself a big line and then put some hashtags in it. Okay, this is of course the beginning, and this over here is where we're at present tense. Okay, and then give yourself two hashtags, equal markers throughout. So you divide the human timeline into thirds approximately. And I emphasize that word approximately, okay? But if you kind of get these approximations in your mind, it helps you to appreciate not only how long the earth has really been here, but also where certain things fit with regards to the human timeline, okay? Each of these three segments is about 2,000 years long. Now, again, that's a big word, approximate, but it's an important word, and I think that you'll see as this plays out, you're going to see that it's relatively accurate. Approximate is accurate in that there's some things that's just difficult for us to put an exact year to. Okay, but just stay with me. You're going to watch how this plays out. Obviously, the first thing that we have on our human timeline is creation. Okay, so draw you a word bubble there. Let there be. Okay, and God creates. Okay. The second thing that happens on our human timeline, about 2,000 years after creation, we've got a fellow living in a tent. His name is Abraham. He's a huge, huge, iconic character in the timeline of Genesis, as well as in the timeline of human history. And so draw you a tent, simple tent there, the first hashtag, not hashtag, what do you call that? Yeah, the first line, and that hash mark, maybe that's what it is. All right, now the second one's not too hard to guess. That's going to be the cross. Okay, that's Jesus. Okay, so about 2,000 years into the timeline, we got Abraham. Another 2,000 years into the timeline, we got Jesus. Now I know what you're thinking to yourself, Sonny. I thought that the world had been here for millions of years, and evolution and all that. That's all stuff that you get out of the secular educational system. That's all garbage. Go with what the book says. It came from the creator. He ought to know. And if you take the book, and especially if you apply the genealogies of the book of Genesis, it's pretty easy to establish that our world is not anywhere near as old. You say, well, how come it looks so old? Because God created it old. What crossed the road? No, not cross the road. What came first, the chicken or the egg? I got two jokes backwards there. What came first, the chicken or the egg? The chicken. Because we know that God created everything full grown. All right, he didn't create Adam and Eve as babies. He created them full grown. All right, so that being said, then he also created the world full grown. That's why it looks so old, because it's a full grown world. He put it in, he gave us a world that could be properly used the moment that mankind was created and put upon it. Okay, so the world is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old, is the best I can tell. On my timeline, I've got approximately 6,000 years. And again, that's approximations. I get that. But now let's add in a third segment and a third picture, and that's going to be you and I. Okay, so that's me and that's Cindy. And there we are at the end of the timeline. All right. If you do this, now you can put approximations on the timeline and you can get things in order. And with regards to that order, you're going to be able to better appreciate how things played out with regards to human history. First thing that I would do is I would encourage you to take the first segment of 2,000 years and divide it in half and draw you a boat. Who do you suppose that character is? Very good. That's Noah. All right. And so about halfway through the first 2,000-year period, you got Noah. The second 2,000-year period, do the same thing. Get you a hash mark and draw you the Star of David. Very good. This is where approximately where you're going to begin to see the kings of Israel as they take over. All right. So as you watch this, then you're able to, and I've only got one more little hash mark that we're going to put right here, but as you watch this play out, you begin to put things in order. And if you can start anchoring yourself to certain iconic characters throughout the timeline, then you can take yourself and you can go to some of these minor characters and recognize that they happen somewhere within the context, etc. Okay. Now, this isn't a minor character, but this is very important to our Genesis study. And so watch this, okay, right here. Halfway between here and here, we're going to draw the 10 Commandments. Who's that? Moses. Very good. So, timeline, divided thirds, Abraham and Jesus. Divide the first one in half, you got Noah. Divide the second one in half, you got David. Divide that in half, that 1,000-year period, approximately in half, and you got Moses. Okay, now that's very, very important because the book of Genesis is going to cover from creation all the way to almost Moses. Not quite Moses. You're going to see that here in just a second. But, and so here you go. Genesis chapter 1 through 25. Notice that goes all the way over here. And then Genesis 26 is just this, okay, but there's a lot of material. In fact, most of our patriarchal, if I can get it out of my head, patriarchal, the fathers, they're going to actually show up right here in this section. And you're going to get not only Abraham, but you're also going to get Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, okay? So they're going to show up here in this particular period. So you can see that Genesis is going to take us this amount. Genesis chapter 1 through 25 is going to take us all the way to Abraham. Genesis 26 through 50 is going to take us from the death of Abraham all the way through the death of Joseph. Interesting, right? Well, at least it is for me. Now, what I want to do, and I'm going to play on that just a little bit more here in just a second, but what I want to do is I want to take some time to now go back, and all 50 of these, we probably won't mention every one of them, but here is what we covered over the last year. It's taken us about a year to get through the book of Genesis, but here's what we covered. And oh dear, how did I do that? I started with the wrong frame. Let's see here. I created my thing wrong. Oh no. Oh me. We're starting with chapter 7. I didn't even get chapters 1 through 6. I'm so sorry, guys. Anyhow, chapter 1. You're going to get creation. Oh, that just bothers me terribly. Chapter 1, you're going to get creation. Okay, now let's jump. Let's see. Let's go back here so we can do this. Come on. Oh, hold it. I did get them. There they are. I must have just. This makes me feel better. All right, chapter 1, creation. Remember, back in the day, we blew that up, and you can see all the details in that thing that Gabriel drew for us, and it's got the 7 days of creation on there. It's really, really good. It's actually only 6 days of creation because what does God do on the 7th? He rests. That's the Sabbath. Okay. Chapter 2 is basically a retelling. Chapter 3, serpent, fall of man. Chapter 4, see the Cain. Cain killed Abel. Chapter 5 is going to be basically a summary of the genealogy from Adam to Noah. And then Noah is going to get directions from God. It's time to build an ark. And so he begins that process. Chapter 7, we're going to get the flood. 8, flood subsides. 9, covenant between God and Noah as well as the earth. And then Noah's descendants are going to begin to disperse in chapter 10. You see the map there? Okay. Tower of Babel, chapter 11. Abram is called to Canaan. Now that's important. Abram, notice he's not Abraham yet. Abram is going to be called toward Canaan. He's not going to arrive in that chapter, but he's going to start that direction. Abraham and Lot are going to have to separate because they got too much stuff. Abram, I said Abraham, I should have said Abram. Abram and Lot have to separate because they got too much stuff. Abram is going to rescue Lot. Remember, he gets carried away by those wicked kings. And he's also going to meet Melchizedek, that rather interesting character who was both a king and a priest. God promises the land to Abram again. The birth of Ishmael, because they just couldn't wait. You know, God promises he's going to have a son, but they just couldn't wait. And so remember that. And this really messes up all kinds of things up. And you remember, so Sarai, she's going to say to him, hey, you know, God's not moving fast enough. Why don't we get our heads together, take a little initiative, and go, you take my handmaiden, Hagar, and you sleep with her, and I'll collect her and take her son as mine, okay, which doesn't work out very well, as you know. But anyhow, that's what happens in that chapter. Chapter 17, God's covenant of circumcision with Abraham, and that's a good chapter if you're studying circumcision, what it's all about. Abraham, now notice we've got a transition. Abraham's three visitors are going to, they're going to come, and notice that transition. Abraham, okay, we've got the covenant, and then Abraham's going to get his name changed. All right, Abraham's going to get some visitors, and they're coming down to inspect just how bad it is in Sodom. Remember, and that's where his nephew Lot is actually living. And Sodom is going to be destroyed. Lot is going to be pulled out of Sodom along with his two daughters and his wife. His wife doesn't make it very far, but then they get up in the cave, and he and his daughters, they do things they shouldn't be doing. And then we got an entire split in the genealogical tree because of some incest that takes place there. Abraham wants to claim his wife Sarai as his sister, which she was his half-sister, and so it wasn't a complete lie. The birth of Isaac, very big deal. Remember, Isaac, if you could read that, it says ha 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 ha. The birth of that's what Isaac means, laughter. Okay, and so that's the icon that follows Isaac throughout our chapters here. There are memory clues. Chapter 22, you see the two here. Chapter 22, Abraham is going to be told to sacrifice Isaac on the altar. In chapter 23, Sarah is going to die. She's going to be buried at the cave of Machpelah. Isaac is going to get a wife in chapter 24. See the four, it's upside down there. 25, big chapter, because as I've told you on the timeline, 25 is when Abraham dies. And so go back to our timeline that we talked about in the opening of our class here, and notice here, you got that first hash mark, okay? Remember the timeline, first hash mark is Abraham. Well, here is where he's going to die. And so, and I don't have my things at the bottom, but this is really about halfway through the book of Genesis. It's only chapter 25. And so we've got another 25 chapters that cover from here to here, okay? All right. So the lengthy period of time that is covered, then Abraham comes on the scene. And then you got this very, very significant, historically rich segment of the book of Genesis, okay? And that's going to take us right up to before Moses. But Abraham's going to die. Jacob and Esau are going to be born. Now, there's one other iconic person that's not mentioned in my little summary here, but he doesn't play, I guess he does play a major part. But the point is Abraham's death and Jacob and Esau, but in between there, Isaac, okay? Because you got Abraham gives birth to Isaac. Isaac gives birth to Jacob and Esau, okay? Actually, their wives do, but anyhow. And so we're going to have the Jacob and Esau birth that takes place. That's why you've got, see how you got Abraham gone to heaven, gone to be with God, and then you've got Jacob and Esau as they're coming into the world. So they're going to be born. Good clues that Gabriel drew, I thought. All right, now let's move on. All right, so there you go, 25, midway through the book of Genesis. In chapter 26, remember, this is the icon that represents Isaac. Isaac is going to get blessed. Jacob is going to trick Isaac and into giving him Esau's blessing. Jacob's going to have to run for his life. And you might recall that on the way to Uncle Laban's house, he's going to have that dream, and he's going to see a ladder that stretches into heaven. Jacob is going to marry. Notice that there's two wedding rings here because he's going to get two wives. He's going to play a trick on him, kind of a dirty trick, but anyhow, he's going to get two wives out of that particular situation. 11 sons of Jacob are going to be talked about in chapter 30. Really good chapter as far as the background of Israel and Israelites, etc. All right, 31. Jacob is now going to run back home. He's fleeing with his family away from Uncle Laban, who's not dealt with him the whole time he's been with him. Hasn't really dealt very fairly with Jacob. But Jacob's going to run, and he's going to go back towards Esau. Very concerned about meeting up with his brother because last time he saw him, Esau wanted to kill him. All right. Jacob is going to be, his name's going to become Israel. He's going to wrestle, remember, wrestle with God, as it says there, wrestle with an angel. Jacob reunites with his brother Esau. This is that chapter where we're not sure what's going to happen. A little bit dicey, but everything works out fine. Esau says, hey, God bless me. I'll become a great nation. It's all good. And so there's no real problem there. Dinah is humiliated, kind of an intervening chapter there. Parents, you deal with that on an age-appropriate basis. Jacob goes to Bethel. That means house of God. Isaac and Rachel die in chapter 35. In chapter 36, an entire chapter is devoted to Esau. I've made a big deal out of that because in Romans chapter 9, it sounds like God hates Esau. In fact, he says he hates Esau. But I think that if you'll understand Romans chapter 9 in its context, it's a lot like how you and I are supposed to hate our parents or hate even our own lives in comparison to how much we love God. And so God favored Jacob so much over Esau that it was as if there was a hatred there. But God blesses Esau. And if you don't believe, you read chapter 36 of the book of Genesis. Chapter 37, Joseph, major character, comes on the scene, coat of many colors. Intervening chapter, Judah and Tamar, again, somewhat of an incestual kind of a situation there. Parents deal with that in an age-appropriate way. Joseph's going to be thrown into prison, as you recall. Then he's going to interpret dreams. Remember, this is the Potiphar and his wife thing, isn't it? And then he's going to interpret dreams while he's in prison, but then he's going to stay there at least another 2 years before the guy remembers, oh yeah, that guy down there in jail, he did something good for me. Joseph then is going to be called out of prison and is going to interpret Pharaoh's dream, major turning point in his life. From this point on, he is going to be like the man. And he's going to rise up to be like second in command over the entire country of Egypt, which is why God sent him there in the first place, or allowed him to be taken there in the first place, so that he could preserve his family. Joseph's brothers are going to come to Egypt because of the famine in the land. And so they're going to come down there, but Joseph's not going to reveal himself to his brothers yet. They go home, then they run out of food, and they've got to come back again. This time they bring Benjamin. Benjamin is going to be accused of stealing the chalice or the cup of Joseph. Joseph then, he is not that, I don't know whether he's playing with them or what it was, but whatever takes place in those chapters, it was kind of intense until finally Joseph can't take it no more. And he said he's going to reveal himself, and so he does. Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. He said, hey, I am your brother. You thought that you sold me off into slavery. You didn't know what I was dead at this particular point, but I ain't. I am here, and I am doing well. And he's going to say in this chapter that God is the reason that we should give praise, that he has preserved us through me coming down here. Horrible act, but that's the way God does. He allows bad things to turn into good things, does he not? And by the way, I'd like to suggest to you that God did not make the brothers sell Joseph into slavery. He just recognized that these were the decisions those kind of men would make. And so because of his ability to see the future, God recognized the future, and he allowed circumstances to come together in such a way that it would be as he needed them to be. And Joseph then gets caught up in the whole whirlwind of life. And the first several years don't seem very promising. He got jail and all those kind of things, but eventually he's going to come into real blessing and riches of God. And it's also that he could preserve the line of Jesus through his brother's seed. Then we got Israel is going to go to Egypt. That's Jacob, the old man Jacob. And if you blew these letters up, you'd see it actually says Israel. The old man Jacob is going to be transported to Egypt. He's going to live there for a little while. And in the land of Goshen, he and his family are going to be given the land of Goshen by Pharaoh because Joseph is such a favored person in Egypt. And so they will be there for some time. Towards the end of Jacob's life, he wants to bless the sons of Joseph. And so he brings them in, Joseph does. Manasseh's the oldest, but Jacob puts his right hand on Ephraim's head, meaning that the real blessing is going to go to Ephraim. Now he's going to say that Manasseh will be blessed too. But Jacob evidently intentionally brings the blessing to the younger over the older, which would not have been, that would have been counterculture at the particular time. And Joseph tries to check him on it, but Dad said, no, this is the way it is. And so over Manasseh. That brings us to our last two chapters. In 49, in fact, it's the very last verse. So you could really say that the book of Genesis concludes also with Jacob's death. But Jacob is going to die in 49, chapter 50, little interlude between the two, and then Joseph is going to die in chapter 50. 49, dad dies. 50, Joseph dies. They both want their bodies to be carried back to the promised land. Jacob actually has it happen shortly after his death. Joseph's going to have to wait some time, but his body will be carried back to the promised land as well. And so, again, now see what you got here, because this I'm fixing to fill in this blank spot here, okay? So watch it. But what you have here now is we have traversed the entire book of Genesis, all the way through Genesis, gone through 50 chapters. Notice how much of the human time, it's almost half of the human timeline is covered just by Genesis. That's why it's such a very, very important book, okay? What's the next book? What comes after Genesis? Exodus. Very good. Watch how this plays out. Exodus, the 8th verse, right in the first chapter, right out the gate in the book of Exodus, it's going to say this. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Joseph has preserved his family. Joseph was used by God to bring a great blessing, not just to Egypt, but primarily to the sons, or Jacob and his sons, Israel. And so Joseph was a phenomenal character in the book of Genesis. We end the book of Genesis with Joseph. The little tiny interlude between the end of the book of Genesis and the beginning of the book of Exodus is eventually a Pharaoh came to the throne who didn't know Joseph. So he didn't have an appreciation for who Joseph was. He doesn't have, as is so often happening in our culture today, he doesn't have a real appreciation for accurate history and what has gone on in the past. Instead of scrubbing history and changing history and turning it into something you wish that it was, you just got to learn from history. Well, history says that Egypt went through a real rough spell. And there was some guy who was used by his God to save Egypt and really the known world at the time. And that guy was named Joseph. Well, by the time Exodus 1 and 8 comes around, the Pharaoh doesn't remember him. He doesn't have any real association with Joseph. And so that's going to open up then the journey into Exodus, where you see that what takes place is all of the children, all of those possibly 3 million that came about during the intervening years are now going to be turned into slaves. Because this Pharaoh does not have an appreciation for who Joseph is and what Joseph did, he's going to say, boy, these Hebrews, they're everywhere. We're going to have to do something about it. And so they enslave them and make them work for them. And that's where Moses is going to come on the scene. Remember? Okay. And Moses is going to show up and he is going to say, let my people go. Remember the song? And he's going to then eventually, after the 10 plagues, he is going to watch it exit Egypt with God's people. Thus the name Exodus. So they're going to leave Egypt. And Exodus is basically going to take us to Mount Sinai and things of that nature, okay? And so it's really, really interesting what happens. But in my growing up years, I always had a little bit of a disconnect between the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus. And my mom was phenomenal in teaching me Old Testament history. And I really, and if it hadn't been for her, I probably still have this disconnect in my head. But if you can watch how Genesis plays out, come all the way up to chapter 50, we're settled in Goshen, having babies, doing good stuff, enjoying life. Time passes. And eventually another Pharaoh comes to the throne. Kind of like we have different presidents that come to the throne, if you want to call it that, in Washington, D.C. Well, eventually there was another Pharaoh, and he just didn't know about Joseph. Well, because he doesn't know about Joseph, he doesn't appreciate the people of Joseph, Joseph's family members, who have now grown into a massive nation of their own. And so he's concerned about them taking over Egypt. And he said, we're going to have to enslave them. And so they do. That's when Moses is sent by God to go down there and free the people of God. That's the transition between the end of Genesis and the opening of Exodus. So there you have the timeline all the way up to here. Good stuff, isn't it? The timeline all the way up to here with regards to the opening days of our creation, all the way through the flood, all the history that goes on all the way up here through Joseph. I hope that you've enjoyed Genesis as the study of it. It's been marvelous for me. And to see it all play out this way, just really, really cool. All right, where are we going next? We're going to go to the book of James. And that's going to be our study for the next 6 weeks. And I'll tell you why. Actually, next week, it'll be 5 weeks after this. There's 6 weeks starting today. 6 weeks between now and the time that we begin our new semester for the School of Biblical Studies. And the next semester will actually be 16 weeks long. It starts the last Sunday of January. And so please mark your calendars for that. If you are not already signed up, please do sign up to be a part of that so that you can receive the emails, etc., and be a part of this Bible study time. But we're going to take the book of James. There's 5 chapters. And after today, we have 5 Sundays before we start the new semester. And so we're going to study through the book of James, and I'll give you the little pictures, the icons that you remember, each of the chapters, etc. I think you'll really enjoy it. So that's where we're going next. Pray about it. Be a part of it, please. All right, let's do some prayer requests. I'll let you look at the picture there that I made up. And while you're doing that, I want to ask you to be praying for my good friend Debbie. She is from the Louisiana area, and she is leaving tomorrow morning with her daughters, and they're going to drive to Florida. And they got a lot of stuff on their plate, a lot of health issues that are being taken care of, and a really stressful time. And would you be praying, please, for Debbie, her safe travels, her family, etc., and her husband, who is going to stay behind and take care of the farm. All kinds of animals that they've got, etc., that he'll be safe and blessed as well. A lot of health issues that are being dealt with, a lot of stressful things, especially in the last several months of this year, that Debbie and her family have gone through. And if you would please keep her in your prayers, that would mean a lot to me, because I love her and her family very, very much. And another unspoken request that she texted me with yesterday, asking that we would be praying for that unspoken. And so we definitely want to do that. There's my cute little house. It really isn't blue. It's brown, but hey, I wanted to illustrate what has taken place over the last several weeks. Most of you are already aware. You probably watch it on social media, that kind of thing. But we have brought Cindy's mom and dad into our home to live with us. And it has been quite a transitional period. Wonderful, wonderful people. Carlton, for years, was an elder of God's church here in one of the churches here in Northeast Arkansas. Talk about a phenomenal woman. Maxine, she's the reason I got this phenomenal woman. And so I have a great love and respect in my heart for these two people. They've now come to live with us, and we've taken our living room, our bedroom, and we had a bathroom that was really an oversized kind of a bathroom. When we bought the house, it was, I guess this bathroom was actually an exercise room / bathroom, because they had one of those treadmill bikes in there, and a big jacuzzi bathtub, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we never use the jacuzzi. We're pretty simple people. And so anyhow, we ripped all of that out, and it was a big enough room that we were able to actually divide it in half. And so we now have a handicap-friendly bathroom for Maxine and Carlton. And we also have a very, very small but functional kitchenette and a door in between. And so it really has worked out really well. So they get the front door of the house. We get the side door of the house. And pray for me, if you will, because I've been working on trying to get Cindy a bedroom. We're presently sleeping in the carport. And I've been trying to get Cindy a bedroom. And I found some leaks in the roof that I built. And so you can tell I'm not much of a carpenter. Could you pray that God will help me stop up my leaks so I can get my wife a bedroom? All right. If you've got prayer requests, I need you to go ahead and put them up there. I'll tell you what's happening. I'm not getting any comments. And the reason for that is because, for whatever reason, it will not let me show the comments. And I forgot to have Cindy fix that for me. And it still isn't doing it. So I guess I'll just have to. It says comments not available for just friends mode. I guess that's my problem. I got this thing in just friends mode. How do I preview mode? Oh, well, when I get off here, I'll have to fix that. All right. Cindy, please remind me, if you will, to get that fixed so I can see what people. So if you have a prayer request, you go ahead and put it on the comment section. I won't see it. because it doesn't allow me to do that. But Cindy, she monitors my presentations these Sundays, she probably sees it and she'll be able to respond to that. Okay. It's the Lord's Day and I'm excited. Lord's Day has become very, very special to me. Not that it hasn't been all of my life, but it has become extra special to me over the last several years. One of the reasons is because we have begun worshiping as a family in our little home church. And it's very, very simple. It's very, very intimate. I really have gotten to a place where I really feel like I'm worshiping. I don't feel like I'm having to stare at the back of the head of the guy sitting in front of me and let some guy in an elevated pulpit manipulate my services. It's more of a give and take. We talk it through. And the center point of our worship service every Lord's Day is the communion. And really, it's the primary thing that we do throughout. We do some singing, but the communion is our Bible study. It's our discussion time. It's our prayer time. All of those things are wrapped around communion. And man, has it become powerful to me. I just love it so much. In fact, quick as I get done here, I'm going to go in there and I'll have my home church service with my family. I'm looking forward to it. And then I get to go eat with my mom and dad. I love Sundays. Remember that song, Goodness Gracious, Great Balls of Fire? Well, we're going to talk about that for the next few weeks. Great Balls of Fire, learning from Elijah. And here's, that's clearly not Elijah, because I don't think we have any pictures of him. Don't think so. But you see the great balls of fire? Elijah is such a wonderful, wonderful character. In fact, he's one of my favorite prophets. Actually, Jeremiah is my favorite. But Elijah's got so much power. And that's what I want to deal with regards to this idea of preparing for power. And it'll have to do with power, all 6 of these lessons. But it all wraps around this great ball of fire that's coming down on my head right up there. You know, you remember I think it's chapter 18. And he's going to go to the top of Mount Carmel. And we're going to have that great competition between him and the prophets of Baal. And he's going to give them all day to pray. And nothing comes from heaven. And so finally, Elijah basically says, step aside and let me show you what a real God can do. And he begins to pray, and God brings the fireball from heaven. All right. So the power of Elijah, to me, that's the climactic moment of Elijah's ministry. And so I want to use these climactic chapters, 17, 18, and 19 of the book of 1 Kings. I want to use those as time for you and I to discuss what we can learn from Elijah in a day of very great difficulties, times when people are looking around wondering if, where is our salvation? What can we do to have comfort, etc., etc.? Where's the hope? Understanding the power that brought about the great ministry of Elijah has tripled now that Jesus has come, and we, his people, have the power of God working in us. So if we can go back and we can examine what happened with regards to Elijah in chapters 17, 18, and 19, and then take that and recognize that you and I have got so much more power at our beck and call because of the Holy Spirit. Imagine what we can accomplish during these last days. So, great balls of fire. Here are the study questions for those of you who want to follow along, fill in the blanks, that kind of thing. You got them? All right, let's get after this. I want to take you to 1 Kings chapter 17. This will be the text that we will use, just 8 verses here, but very important verses as we establish my first point, which is, where is it? Right up to the top, preparing for the power. What did Elijah do as he prepared? Because you and I, we want the power of God working in us, do we not? And so what must we do to prepare for the power? Well, let's use the example of Elijah and see if we can learn from that. And there's several things, I think 4, that I draw from this passage that you and I can be doing present tense as we are promoting and preparing for facilitating the power of God working in us. Now, Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word. And so you're familiar with this. Ahab was a bad, bad guy. His wife, even worse. Her name's Jezebel. When I think of Jezebel, I think of Yzma on that movie, The Emperor's New Groove. Just a horrible looking woman, but thinks she's all that. Well, anyhow, put that mental image into your mind. That's Jezebel. And her husband is Ahab. And she just leads him around by his nose. He's a pitifully wicked as well as cowardice kind of a person. But during the time of Elijah, Ahab is going to be ruling, and Elijah is going to say to Ahab, because of the sin of you and your reign, God is taking away the rain and the dew, and you're not getting it back till I say so. God's given me that authority. Verse 2, and the word of the Lord came to him, depart from here and turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. Let's pause for a moment. The first application that I want to draw from this is that, and I hope you can read that, boy, it didn't show up very good. Embrace solitude. The first thing that I would suggest to you as we prepare for the power of God is we need to re-emphasize the power of being solitary, alone with God. You remember when Jesus actually said about prayer that you should go into your closet where you're alone and speak to your Father in secret, the one who sees and knows everything in secret? Go ahead and speak to him in secret. Notice also in Luke chapter 5 and verse 16, it says that when Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and he prayed. Jesus was a solitary man. He was an individual who understood the need to be alone. In our fast-paced world of, run here, run there, endless projects, we tend to not really slow down enough to hear and to see what God is doing. In fact, our worship services are, they're so prepackaged and they're so pre-manufactured, computerized almost, and regimented, that even in those situations, we're not really at peace. And it's not an intimate, solitary moment. There's a lot in Scripture that talks about coming together to worship. But there's an equal amount that talks about being separate so that you can have your own personal, intimate time with God. Be still and know that I am God is a very, very important principle for you and I as we are preparing for the power of God. So you find that in your life, you're just not seeing God working as vividly as perhaps he has in other points in your life, or maybe you're going through a dark valley and you want to see the power of God, but it just doesn't seem to be showing itself. Maybe the first step you need to take is find some solitude. Get off by yourself. Be in a place where you and God can have intimate conversation with one another. It's one of the reasons that home church has become such a huge, huge blessing in my life and the life of my family. Because we've gotten it down to a little small group. And we're all very comfortable with each other. We come into my house, sit on my couch. And now that I'm actually, because, we got a transition period going on here, bringing Cindy's folks to live with us, etc. And I'm still building Cindy's bedroom, in the carport where we meet for our worship service. I've actually got a big old bed. Gabriel's sleeping on the couch, and I've got a bed sitting in the middle of it. Actually, just mattresses sitting on the floor. But some today and during our home service, they're going to be sitting on the mattresses as we sing our songs, take communion, have our Bible thoughts, etc., etc. Very, very simple, not complex, not sterilized as traditionalism will do to us. It's very small, intimate, solitary in many respects, okay? Because it's just a little tiny group. I think the Lord understood and desires for us to have those kind of moments. Clearly, he understood them. And so as you come back to Elijah now, notice that God is going to say to Elijah during this preparation for power, because we haven't gotten to the fireball yet, okay? That's next chapter. In setting that up, Elijah is preparing for the power. By the way, spoiler alert, next time, maybe it's the next one after that, I can't recall. I think it's the third lesson in this, is promoting the power. How do you go about actually making the power shine as brightly as it can? Stay with me on that for that lesson. It's a really good one. But here we are preparing for the power. And one of the ways he does that is God says, you need to go and have some solitary time. Now, yeah, he's hiding from Ahab. That's true, okay? And so it's not just so that he can get along with God. It's also so that he will be able to survive the wickedness of Ahab and Jezebel. But I think there's something to be said about the faith journey that is going to happen in the life of Elijah as he goes there to this ravine and he stays there for all this time. And then watch this, number two. This is really cool. Number two, expect God's intervention. While he's at the Brook Cherith, which is east of Jordan, He says, God says, you shall drink from the brook that I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. This is great. So he went and he did according to the word of the Lord. He went and he lived by the brook Cherith, that is east of the Jordan. And the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening. And he drank from the brook. How cool is that? They've got some, I don't think they're really working out very well, but they've got these drones now that I'm told in some places you can order online and they'll actually send the food to you via a drone. And the drone carries it. I don't know how, but it carries it, and brings it right to your doorstep. Can you imagine? Well, that's kind of what's happened. This is the first one of those. Way back in the day, Elijah is being fed by the ravens. I don't know. Did they carry it in their beaks? Did they carry it in their claws? How many were there? I have no idea, but I think he had plenty to eat. And they're carrying in bread and they're carrying in meat, and he gets to drink right there out of the brook. Things are good, but my point is, no, don't just embrace solitude, but expect God to intervene on your behalf. We need to be people, if we're preparing for the power, we need to be people who expect it. It's kind of like, those folks the farmers that, they're having a drought and boy, they needed rain bad, or they're going to lose their entire season of crops. And so they decided they're going to have a Wednesday night prayer service. So all the farmers, they gather at the church building, but only one of them brought an umbrella. That's Elijah. The only guy who really brings umbrellas to the table when he's praying for rain. Elijah's going to bring an umbrella. You know why? Because he expects it to happen. That's the second thing. We need to expect that God's going to intervene. Now, again, I don't know that you and I can necessarily expect the ravens to feed us. God's God. He can do it just as easily today as he did back in the day. But the point is that however you define that, and I know there's a big controversy about miracles today, et cetera, I personally absolutely believe that God still does miraculous things. It does seem that he has changed somewhat, at least at present, in the miraculous ways that he approaches us. I've never seen a dead man raised to life, et cetera. But I definitely believe in miracles. And I think one of the reasons that our fellowship struggles so often is because we have boxed God in and said he doesn't do that anymore. Yeah, he does. If God wants to do that, he does that. You've seen situations. The guy's body's filled with cancer. A couple months later, he goes back to the doctor after people have been praying left and right. He has no more cancer. How did that happen? God still moves, and he moves in miraculous ways. And so the second point that I would say to you is don't just embrace solitude, get alone with God, but also expect him to do something, because he's gonna, if you sincerely ask him. Point number 3. Interesting what happens now. After a while, the brook dried up because there was no rain in the land. Now, this seems odd to me because God is evidently miraculously causing the ravens to bring food in. Could God not have miraculously kept the brook flowing? Yeah, he could have. But for whatever reason, God felt that it was very important at this point in Elijah's faith journey that the brook dry up and he moved to another location. Application. We need to walk with God as he works within the system. Meaning that God is a God who loves all humanity, for God so loved the world. And so he works within that system. And sometimes we as people who are recipients of the power of God are going to have to understand that we may have to travel the same journey that those who God is trying to correct and draw back to him are traveling. And so Elijah is going to experience a drought in his own little personal brook. And God is going to use that scenario to move him into a different situation. But in that process, he's going to continue to build his faith as he prepares to use him in a mighty, great balls of fire kind of a powerful way when we get to Mount Carmel, okay? So all I'm asking you to do is watch how Elijah is going to continue to grow in his faith through all of these steps. He had some solitary time with God. God did some crazy, awesome things by feeding him with the ravens. God now allows the brook to dry up. Now what are we going to do? Is it possible that Elijah sat there day by day seeing the brook get lower and lower and think to himself, God, I can only see one of two potential solutions to this. Either by the last time I lap up the last little bit of water, you're going to let me go ahead and bring rain back on the land, or you've forgotten about me down here in this ravine. God always has other options that you and I can't even think of. Elijah, I doubt very seriously Elijah had any idea that the widow of Zarephath was going to be part of the scenario. You know, but this is God. And so what God does is he's going to move Elijah into another part of the faith journey, not just for the country, but for Elijah too. In John 17 and 15, it says, I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. Notice what God does here. He allows Elijah to experience what it is like to be living in the world. There for a little bit, it was almost, kind of one of those out-of-world experiences. He's in his own little personal ravine. He's got his own little personal factory of food coming in and got the brook flowing. Everything's good. But God says, I don't want him to be taken out of the world. I want him to be protected from the evil one. Now, in that case, he's talking about his folks. Jesus is talking about his folks. In this case, well, Elijah was his folks too. But in this case, the evil one is specifically Ahab and Jezebel. Okay. But the point is that God expects you and I to function within the context and to function well within the context. And sometimes he's not going to just graphically protect you from all the circumstances around about you. He's going to allow you to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, just like everybody else is as well. But the difference is you are on a faith journey. And in your faith journey, you're beginning to see that God can do this in a powerful, powerful way. And he's going to take care of me. The fourth and final point is this part here at the bottom, which is really quite interesting. Verse 8, then the word of the Lord came to him, arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. My fourth point is that we need to accept assistance. When it comes from God, we need to jump at it and allow it to come. And to celebrate that assistance. God had set things up for there to be a widow who would feed Elijah. Now, it's an amazing story. You really need to read the context in the following verses. We're not going to get to cover it in this series, but it's an amazing story how that miraculously speaking, this woman is blessed because she blesses the man of God. Big applications there. Again, don't have time to really deal with that in detail. But notice how that God allows the brook to dry up, but he does not allow his man to go hungry. Isn't that interesting? So the four things I would share with you is embrace solitude. Spend time personally with God. Expect him to do something. Don't just be a person who prays and goes through religious motions without expecting that there's going to be some results. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man, guess what? It gets God's attention. And walk with God as he works within the system. Sometimes he's going to require that you and I suffer right along with the world in order for his message to come about. That doesn't mean he's not using this powerfully. And then number four, accept the assistance that comes your way. 1 Corinthians 9 and 14 says, the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. I've known of people who objected to preachers getting paid, evangelists, missionaries being supported, etc., which is really quite an anti-biblical, anti-Bible kind of a position. God himself inspires these words. He, the Lord, commands that if you're going to devote your life to the presentation of the gospel, you have the right to live by that as well. It's okay to be supported. It's important that we be supportive. I want to end by, again, showing you, I wish we had time to go into the context, but this widow is going to be graphically blessed. Why? Because she blessed. The widow is blessed because she blessed the man of God. And if we will be people who will continue to be a blessing to those who are devoting their entire life, putting all of their treasures into one effort, and that is to get the gospel out. And there's many that you know who are like that. Those people need to be admired. They need to be lifted up in prayer, and they need to be supported financially instead of having to live on peanuts and scrap for secondhand stuff. These folks ought to be taken care of because, hear me, and it's not just because I'm involved in this particular area of occupation, but it's important for us to know this. There is no higher calling than to be a man who has devoted himself to the full-time work of presenting the gospel. There is no higher calling. And yet many of our Christian moms and dads want their children to do anything but go into full-time ministry. Mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be missionaries. Teach them to be doctors and lawyers and such. We need to better take care of those men who are, and women who are working in the gospel as well. Many godly women who are missionaries in foreign countries and even here at home who are working full-time, many of them. We need to take care of these people because, as 1 Corinthians 9 says, it's okay, it's right for them to have their living come because of the gospel. That's what happens to Elijah. He's being taken care of royally here, but what happens when the brook dries up? Somebody else takes care of him. It's good to support those who are presenting the gospel of God. Well, if this message was important to you, I would ask you to support me and to support my particular ministry. Please, it would mean a lot to me. It's the Lord's Day, and you know, on the Lord's Day, there is nothing better than to celebrate the Lord with the Lord's Supper. I ask you to keep it simple, keep it innocent, and keep it meaningful. Can't wait to get in there in just a moment and have Lord's Supper with my family. I pray that your day with the Lord will be extra special. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Sonny Chow saying, be there. Matthew 16:26.